Hey, it's Mike here, and today, the Game Changers. It was recently fully debunked by Joe Rogan on his podcast. I'm actually no longer vegan. Kidding, of course, but I want to have some fun and respond to some of the claims that Joe Rogan made, some of the actual numbers he threw out there in a recent conversation on his podcast after watching Game Changers. As usual, we'll put his claims up against the research and logic, and hopefully this will be the last video I make about Joe in a while. I know you guys get a little bored with this, but let's go. For those of you that don't know, Game Changers is a documentary that just came out on Netflix. It showcases a bunch of vegan athletes and definitely busts the myth that you can't get enough protein eating plants, and also that you can't be an elite athlete eating a vegan diet, and I have a whole video on that from a while back. And there's some amazing people in that documentary, and at least one hilarious scene, the erection scene. I don't want to give too much of it away. You should watch it in case you haven't. And in addition to Joe's claims, there have been a few critical articles like this one. Personal trainers slam Netflix vegan Game Changers documentary. It showcased this tweet by a personal trainer. It's just, the science of Game Changers is blank. There's nothing, which is obviously a joke, but it's also a misrepresentation because they do actually have the sources cited for a lot of studies in the corner if you're watching closely. Also love how they put hashtag go vegan to try and get all the vegans to hear their message. And the article's only criticism of the movie, responding with actual numbers or figures, was the one about the peanut butter and jelly sandwich and how you would need 5 tablespoons of peanut butter to reach that amount of protein that they claim would be equivalent to beef in the movie. But to achieve this, they discluded bread, and whole wheat bread is actually a decent source of protein, so really you just need 2 slices of bread and 2 tablespoons of peanut butter to equal 16 grams of protein that is also found in 3 ounces of beef. So this is the caliber of criticism of the movie out there, but that's besides the point. Let's get to Joe's criticism, and it starts with his conversation with his guest about how outspoken vegans are.
So when do hunters ever get confrontational and violent with people who don't want to eat meat?
Have you been on Facebook, or have you been to any of the vegan festivals where people are eating raw cow brains and raw dead squirrel? Yeah. But let's assume vegans are more confrontational and ask why. Well, zooming out, we have one group of people that is doing harm and another group of people that is trying to stop that harm. Which one is going to do the activism? To reframe his question in a way I think he could get behind, when do people who eat dogs in China confront people who don't eat dogs? You aren't an activist for the status quo. Anyway, the conversation gets going a little bit about failing health of vegans.
They're going to quit veganism and they're going to start eating meat again because of their health.
Yeah.
That's the truth. It's some ridiculous number. Google this. What number? I think they said the number of vegans and vegetarians that eat meat when they're drunk is something outrageous. It's like close to 90%.
90% of vegans eat meat when they're drunk. Okay, well, let's take a close look at this. First of all, it was a survey done by Voucher Codes Pro, which I think is actually the highest form of peer-reviewed evidence. Secondly, it wasn't even about vegans specifically, it was about vegetarians. And thirdly, it wasn't 90%, it was about a third of them. This is a perfect illustration of how Joe's head works, though. He takes something that isn't even about vegans, makes it about vegans, and then in his head multiplies it by 3. Furthermore, this media ethics organization fact-checked this and mentioned that there is no original survey from the company that doesn't appear to exist anymore. It appears that voucher companies have a history of making up viral news to get traffic to their site, and major news outlets across the political spectrum are guilty here. And even if this survey of vegetarians from Coupons R Us or whatever is accurate, vegans have a different attitude than vegetarians. Because vegetarians are already eating several types of animal products on a daily basis, it's a little bit easier for them to jump over to meat than a vegan who's eating none. And also, just because something happens when you're drunk doesn't mean that it was the right thing to do or that your body needed it.
Yeah, well, no kidding.
How many vegans wind up quitting and eating meat?
Oh, we're gonna get into this one in a second in detail, but I just love how he tells his dude to Google stuff. Hey bro, Google how many vegans beat their wives. Hey dude, can you just Google vegans are dumb? Hey, can you look up how many vegans are actually Hitler, like he survived and cloned himself? Hey man, can you just Google something that confirms my anti-vegan bias? Thanks.
But Cam Newton, who's a quarterback of the Carolina Panthers, big dude, 6'6", 250, 260, he went vegan and he cannot get healthy. He cannot, he's been injured.
Okay, I think there's a shift happening because this is the first time that I've scrolled down in his comments and just seen widespread disagreement with what Joe is saying. Vegans and non-vegans alike. I mean, here are comments on Cam. He had health problems before going vegan. He went vegan after he got hurt. It was a style of play that actually led to the injuries. I mean, these people across the board are just not buying what he's saying. Point after point actually rebutting what he says. But in terms of Cam Newton, from this recent article, it appears that he's healing now. From 5 days ago, his injury has healed well. We'll see what happens. The standard that vegans are held to is ridiculous. He pinpoints the one athlete that has had injury problems in a sport where everybody is riddled with injuries. Clearly, this is not a uniquely vegan problem. And if you watch the movie, which I almost start to doubt whether he did as he goes on, a lot of athletes say it helps them recover, it helps them stay healthy. It's probably the 30% lower inflammation markers that vegans have. And for an injury anecdote, why not? Looking to Scott Jurek, who's an ultramarathoner who in the movie is trying to set the record for the fastest completion of the Appalachian Trail, which is 2,200 miles long. In the beginning, he has a pretty serious injury, yet he still goes on, is able to maintain a good enough pace to set the record.
Not even a week into the journey, I developed a quadricep tear. I had to start thinking, okay, how am I going to get through this? There are no rest days when you're setting a speed record on the Appalachian Trail. I needed to recover while I was still pushing my body to the brink.
Well, you know that guy, Dr. Sean Baker. He's the advocate of that carnivore diet. He marks all these people that were originally in that Game Changers documentary that James Cameron put out.
Yeah.
A shit ton of them quit before the movie came out, and they had to pull them out of the movie because they were vegan, and because of health reasons, they had to quit.
Of course, Joe Rogan still views Sean Baker as a credible source, an all-meat dieter whose diet is so unenvironmentally friendly that it would likely double all of U.S. emissions if we decided to adopt it as a nation. No. But there was a case of quitting that I was aware of, and that is Tim Sheaf, who is the parkour dude who was vegan. However, he is not a particularly rational person. He's a nice guy, but he believes the earth is flat, went on a 30-plus day fast where he didn't eat food, and also drank his own pee. I just can't with that, but there's a whole movie of vegan athletes, people who have been vegan for a while, who are still vegan.
Right. It's an indoctrination movie, and it's extremely biased, and it's not focusing on all of the various problems that people have. It's only focused on the positive aspects of it.
Oh, what? The whole movie didn't focus on how bad a plant-based diet is? What did you expect, Joe? I mean, you can make your own movie, probably be called Lame Changers, How Meat Eating is Cool. I don't know. But this is where I feel like I need to mention that Joe is, in fact, sponsored by a meat company. Joel Kahn recently told Plant-Based News that it was his main sponsor. I'm not sure about that, but it is a literal service that sends meat to people. You know, whether it affects what he says or is just a package deal that he has a stake in meat, pun intended. But when talking about bias, it's worth mentioning, and everybody has a bias, that's just the reality, but the question is the person also wrong AF? And so far, he's been verifiably wrong AF. Let's see if he continues that way.
And distorting the reality of those positive messages, particularly like the strong man who's on a load of steroids.
Yeah, they forget that part.
They forget that part.
Strongmen take steroids. I'm not sure if he knows this openly, and it has never been disclosed how much steroids Patrik takes. Yet in Joe's mind, it gets cranked up to an F load. And why is this a criticism? I mean, Joe Rogan has been on steroids for a decade now, and not even for performance, just to counteract the lowering of testosterone through aging. There's a little bit of projection going on here. It reminds me of when he criticized Patrik, or at least took a jab at him for being short, when the reality is he's the same height as Joe Rogan.
And even the strongman, he's not like an elite strongman.
Anyway, he then goes on a sort of repetitive rant about how Patrik Baboumian isn't a top-tier strongman. I have a whole video response to that, if it is a point that compels you. Okay, then we finally get to that study on quitting vegan diets.
A very repeated number of 84% of vegans and vegetarians end up going back to eating meat at some level.
Yeah, right before they die.
It's actually not even controversial. I did a whole video on this a couple years back, actually, but it's clear that Joe doesn't actually know this research. A quote directly from it. Interestingly, health did not present a noticeable difficulty for study participants. And for that 84% figure, it did lump vegetarians and vegans together. We can't separate the two. But get this, the main reason that people were quitting were for social reasons like not wanting to stick out in a crowd. It's clearly not vegans about to die, and this makes me wonder if the failure rates would be just as high, if not higher, if there was a vegan society and people were trying to eat meat. They would fail hard, and maybe vegans are failing because they have to deal with a bunch of people who have the exact same attitude about being vegan that these dudes have. It's also just simply hard for anybody to make a major lifestyle change. It appears that about 90 or more % of people fail their New Year's resolutions, things that Joe would definitely support, like trying to lose weight if you're overweight, exercising, things like that are not easy. I would also venture to say in the 5 years since this study has happened, people have shifted socially to be more accepting of vegans, and I would bet that the rate is a little bit lower than it was. And to further challenge the 90% of vegans eat meat when they're drunk claim from this same 84% study, it appears that 16% of vegans and vegetarians reported lapsing in the past, and get this, when lapsing, vegans are less likely to give up and quit their diet than the vegetarians were. And another fact not normally shared from the study is that of the people that failed, 37% of those vegetarians and vegans actually wanted to give it another shot in the future. But most importantly, that people weren't quitting because they were dying, they were quitting mainly for social reasons. All right.
Folks, we're omnivores. We're omnivores. We exist better. We are more healthy on an animal and vegetable diet.
More unbacked claims about vegans being unhealthy. The reality is that vegans compared to omnivores have 15% lower cancer rate, 78% lower total risk of diabetes, about 75% lower risk of high blood pressure, normal BMI average, the list goes on. Clinically, the only diet shown to reverse heart disease. It doesn't end there. Tip of the iceberg. I know it's not his thing, but never have I seen Joe cite a study demonstrating that meat eaters are healthier, especially healthier than vegans. No, in fact, the low-carb diet that he promotes from this meta-analysis is associated with a 30% increased risk of mortality.
This idea that you're going to save the world, listen, all of our agricultural, when they talk about greenhouse gases, we talked about this the other day, 9% of all greenhouse gases is because of agriculture. Less than half of that is because of meat. Less than half of that is because of beef.
I'm glad I just did a video on this because I could just feel this sort of meme popping up into the ethos. No, the reality is that the EPA is massively off from other estimations of, for example, global emissions by the FAO, which are, 14.5 to 18% of all emissions, on par with transportation. But in that video, I did the math and the spreadsheets are viewable. Anyone can see them. And I simply multiplied independent emissions figures for animal products by total production in the US, and we can see we land in a range of about 13.5 to 20% of all emissions from livestock. Furthermore, how animal ag is so inefficient that the land we would save by stopping using livestock for food would be enough for us to plant trees and be about carbon neutral as a nation.
Elk?
Yeah.
How much is that?
Oh, man.
It's zero.
Yeah.
You have if you just eat elk, you have way less impact on the greenhouse gases than you do if you're a vegetarian. And that's a fact.
Funnily enough, elk is actually not zero, and interestingly, the dairy industry made this a point of contention, mentioning something that is true, that wild animals, wild ruminants in particular, also emit methane. There's obviously not currently enough wild elk to feed the US for any reasonable amount of time, so his solution is not a real solution, but saying that we decided to populate all of our wild lands with a bunch of elk, the reality is they would be emitting a ton of methane. Judging on the size of the animal, the emissions would probably be between beef and lamb. And by the way, lamb is actually higher per kilogram than beef, so we still have methane emission problems. But we're getting a little bit away from the Game Changers movie, which is why I want to tie it back to how I would love to see Joe Rogan sit down with this dude, this anti-poaching guy who has a paramilitary group in Africa.
We are the SEAL Team 6 of conservation. We're the guys that go in and stop the hemorrhaging.
He is everything that Joe Rogan wants to be in terms of badass manliness, yet he takes an exact opposite stance. He actually prevents hunters from doing damage to animals, and he is a vegan instead of being a hunter who not only eats meat, but promotes a service in which they just send meat directly to your house. And really, from Joe Rogan's response, you wouldn't even think that he watched the same movie. I don't know how he's able to ignore all of the amazing athletes in there. I mean, this woman doesn't get that much credit.
So when I transitioned over to an entirely plant-based diet, I wasn't sure if I was gonna survive. And I actually became like a machine. I got up from being able to move about 300 pounds on the inverted leg sled to moving 585 pounds, 60 reps, times 5 sets.
But she's super badass. Joe Rogan cannot squat that much. So in the end, I don't understand what level of mental gymnastics Joe Rogan had to do to just completely ignore all of these athletes that are on a plant-based diet or on a fully vegan diet that are way stronger than him and way faster than him. Like other people on the internet, Joe Rogan made some very weak claims against the movie and against vegans in general. I mean, using like a coupon company's survey on vegetarians, multiplying it by 3 and applying it to vegans. I mean, it's ridiculous. He wants to believe that everybody, athlete or not, is going to quit a vegan diet, have a health breakdown. But look at all these athletes. Now, a lot of them have probably been vegan for long enough to replace virtually every cell in their body with plant material. It's kind of disappointing because actually the creator of the movie Game Changers and sort of the star of Game Changers went on plant-based news and optimistically told Klaus that he thought Joe Rogan would see this movie and actually try going vegan. The movie does such a good job of addressing all of those claims that Joe Rogan makes against the plant-based diet that one would think that, but sadly the reality is no. Anyway, I'm still looking for that somewhat scientific attempt at debunking the Game Changers so I can actually respond, hopefully in a video format so it's more fun to watch. Let me know if you see one. All right, that's it for today. Feel free to let me know in the comments what you thought about all of Joe's claims and what you thought about Game Changers in general. Did you like it? Did you think everything was valid? Let us know. All right, feel free to like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Can you just type Joe Rogan is smarter than vegans? Cool.